I need to confess something. My Instagram strategy needs a refresh. I've been pretty open lately about feeling like I'm in my flop era on Instagram. And while I know it's not all about the numbers, it is pretty hard to deny how frustrating it feels to see your reels get 7,000 or 10,000 views when you had previously seen them get 50,000 or even 800,000 views. Okay, I'm gonna stop myself complaining right now before y'all get annoyed with me, because I know that me 5 years ago would be annoyed with me right now. But nonetheless, sometimes you just have that feeling that things need to get shaken up a little bit. It's time to create a new strategy and make a new plan. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do in today's video. I'm challenging myself to come up with my comeback content for Instagram. So we're gonna plan the content calendar that will hopefully lift me out of my flop era and get that engagement back. And I'm gonna take you along with me. And as if the stakes weren't high enough, I'm gonna do all of that in 1 hour, because I wanna prove to you that planning your content doesn't have to be stressful, it doesn't have to take a ton of time, and it can actually be kind of fun. So let's do this. Now, before we dive into planning content, it's important that we set a baseline for what has done well for us in the past and what maybe hasn't performed so well. Before we really get into this, I want to emphasize that it's important that you don't just keep repeating what's worked well for you in the past over and over again. I have definitely fallen into this. I know many creators do. And sometimes, I'll be honest, that can work for you, right? If you have one reel that really pops off and then you basically make like almost a duplicate of that reel, but with some slight variations, yeah, it'll probably also get a lot of views. But the problem is, if you do that over and over again, eventually it's gonna start to feel stale. And I find that the stuff that goes the most viral, that gets the most views, is probably gonna be the original of that series, right? So it's when you take risks and when you experiment and when you do something fresh that you tend to see the best results. So it's a balance. It's important to understand what performs well for you and what doesn't, so that you can leave behind what doesn't serve you and embrace what your audience really engages with, but you also don't want to become a one-trick pony. Now, when it comes to analyzing our analytics, my personal favorite way to do this is with Dash Hudson. If you have been watching my channel for a while, then you'll know that Dash Hudson is a longtime partner of the channel, and I really appreciate them. And today's video is also sponsored by Dash Hudson, but honestly, even when they're not sponsoring videos, this is how I'm checking my Instagram analytics. It's a user-friendly platform. You can sync your Instagram, your TikTok, your YouTube, your Pinterest, and analyze all your data in one place on really visually driven dashboards. For example, I can just jump into my Instagram dashboard and really quickly see my top performing reels for the entire year, because unlike the inside of the Instagram app, Dash Hudson doesn't limit you to just the past 90 days. So I can see my top performing reels and I can start to ask myself, like, what is similar about these pieces of content? What are the themes here? What is this telling me about what my audience likes to see from me? So I'm going to take a few notes on this so that I can take that with me into the brainstorming process. So for example, I can see that my top performing reels tend to be about income streams, money, making money as a creator, how to get brand deals. And I have one outlier that's this cute little photo shoot one that I really made on a whim, and I'm kind of proud that it happens to be in my top reels, which again, I think is a good example of trying something fresh, doing something you've never done before, because you never know. So I'm going to take note of these things so that when it's time to come up with the ideas in just a few steps, I have that in the back of my mind. Another cool feature about Dash Hudson is their new Vision AI tool. This tool takes into account your past post performance and gives you a prediction of how well new content is going to perform. So you can get a sense of how well your posts are going to do before you even post them. All you have to do is upload your piece of media to the library, and Vision will give you a prediction of what it thinks your engagement's going to be. I really think that using analytics in this way is going to change up your strategy for the better. It helps you to create content in a way that's really informed of what your audience responds best to, and it saves you from like wasting time on content that wouldn't have really performed well anyway. Okay, so if you also want to use Dash Hudson to analyze your analytics to predict your future performance, then you can get a free trial using the link in my description. I really do highly recommend it, and thanks again to Dash Hudson for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so realistically at this stage, I want you to take just 10 minutes to look through your analytics, write down a few notes about what is common among your top performing content and maybe what's common among your lower performing content, so you can get a little bit of a list going of what works well and what doesn't work so well. So after looking through my own, here is my list. So my top performing content, like I was saying, tends to be around money and income streams, making money as a creator. It also is usually with a trending audio and some flashy B-reel, so the visuals are really dynamic. And I think that they all have a very inspirational or aspirational vibe to them. Now, when it comes to my lower performing content, I think that my videos that are just kind of plain talking head, maybe they have a couple titles, but honestly, not a lot more visuals than that, they tend to perform not so great, which is not that surprising. Honestly, I was probably being a little bit lazy with those videos when I posted them. Also, I think a common theme among these is when I've been making videos that are kind of like what you need to know, not necessarily what you want to know. So talking about those topics that aren't so trendy and flashy, like making money or getting brand deals, but talking about stuff like how to like ethically take inspiration from other creators or choosing which platform you should be posting on. It's helpful stuff for sure, but it's just not the most exciting. It wouldn't be what we'd call like top of funnel content. And finally, another consistent factor in my underperforming reels is a trendy audio with B-roll, but there's no clear takeaway. There's no clear value proposition. It's just like day in my life, or this is what my trip looked like. You know, there's not as much of a takeaway, so they don't tend to perform as well. So this is just my list of themes between top performing content and low performing content. You need to look at your own analytics and do the same, because it's going to be really helpful when we get into our idea brainstorm. Okay, so now that we've asked our audience what they like best indirectly by looking at our analytics, now we're going to take a more direct approach and actually ask the audience. Imagine that. We're gonna actually talk to our followers about what they want to see from us. It seems so obvious, but so many creators do not do this. Okay, so there's a few ways you can do this. For example, you could create a story with a question box asking people what they'd like to see more of from you. I'll be honest, this is kind of a lazy way to do it because it's kind of putting the onus on your audience to come up with new ideas and you're not really prompting them in any way. I think it's okay to do this like maybe once a quarter or like twice a year, but if you're doing it every single month when you're planning your content, your followers are going to start to get annoyed. They're going to be like, come up with your own ideas. So this strategy can be helpful, but use it sparingly. Some other ideas that are a little bit more engaging and that take a little bit more work from you up front is coming up with a series of polls with different options and asking people what their preferences out of a list of say 3. You'll probably get a lot more engagement with this because people love voting on polls and it doesn't take as much effort from them. Now, it's always good when you are soliciting feedback from your audience to ask for people to send you DMs. If you watch my video about story strategy, then you'll know that DM responses is like the biggest thing that you can do to get your stories served more in the stories algorithm. So if you post a story and it gets a ton of DM responses, you're gonna see way more views on it when you get to the end of the 24 hours. So if you wanna get as much feedback as possible, my recommendation is first story slide, ask people to reply to you in the DMs, and then you could follow up with maybe a question box or polls or whatever you wanna do, but your entire story will get more reach that way. And then you can continue those conversations in the DMs. I think this is really the most valuable place that you can gather insight. And this is what I'd really encourage you to do. You can reach out to specific people. So for me, I know there's certain followers that they're always replying to my stories. I see them in my comments and all of my reels. I know them by name. So I'm going to send them DMs and ask them, hey, I'd love to hear how I can support you on your creator journey right now. What are the biggest struggles you're facing? What are your biggest goals? And has there been any standout content from me lately that you really enjoyed that you'd like to see more of? I think people will feel flattered that you reach out to them, especially if you preface it by saying, hey, I really appreciate your support. I see your comments, I see your messages, and it really means a lot to me, which is why I want your opinion. You're gonna get the most helpful responses this way because you're gonna hear from people in their own words what they're struggling with, what they want your help with, or what they really appreciate seeing from you. Okay, so I'm gonna take 15 minutes now to do a few of those things. I'm gonna message like 3 or 5 people. I'm gonna post on my story to gather responses. You don't need to take a super long time to do this because really right now we're just kind of like putting it out there, putting some feelers out, and later on we're gonna come back and check on those answers. All right, we have reached the part of the process that has sucked in stronger creators than I. We are all at risk of losing hours of our lives in this step if we are not careful. And that's because it's time to scroll and look for trends. So I've never really worked in the corporate world before, but I hear that in the corporate tech world, we call this time boxing. Productivity gurus call this the Pomodoro method, and regular people call it setting a timer so you don't get caught up in scrolling on your phone. So set a timer now for 10 minutes. Seriously, no more. You only need 10 minutes to do this. this, and then head over to your Reels feed and scroll. Look for sounds with that little arrow that's up and to the right that indicate that it's trending. And more than anything, look for formats or styles or inspirations that really grab your attention and speak to you. We're not necessarily just trying to duplicate what we see on our Reels feed. Instead, we're trying to learn from what grabs our own attention to know how we could potentially grab the attention of our audiences. When you come across Reels that you really like the vibe of, that you'd like to replicate with your own fresh spin on it, or an audio that you really want to use, I recommend saving it to a collection that you make that's titled like January content or whatever, so then it's really easy to find and go back to later. As you're scrolling, try to think about those themes that we wrote down earlier of what kind of content normally performs really well for you and what kind of content doesn't. And try to select music or formats or trends that really fit in with that category of top performing content. And yes, during this process, when you are looking for trending audios, it can be helpful to find ones that have fewer uses. So maybe like 50,000 or less, or even like 15,000 or less, because that might mean that you're like earlier to them. So people aren't like sick of that audio when it comes across their feed. But I honestly think a lot of people put more emphasis on this than they would need to. It's less important, like all the stats associated with an audio. It's more important that you have a really great idea to go along with it. You really want to focus on coming up with a concept that connects to your audience. And so coming up with something that aligns with those themes of top performing content and that aligns with the feedback that you're getting from your audience, which we're going to look at more in a little bit. Okay, so in the 10 minutes, maybe you save like 5 or 10 different audios that you're like, maybe I could use this, or formats or, trends. Now it's time to move on to our next step. Okay, at this point, we've done a bunch of gathering input, right? We've gathered some trends. We've looked at the themes within our analytics. Now it's time to actually generate some output. So we are going to do a brain dump. So for the next 10 minutes, you are just going to write down all of the ideas that have hopefully come to you as you've started to think about the themes around your top performing content, as you've started to talk in your DMs with your followers, and as you've seen some trends that you might want to replicate. I'm sure at this point, all kinds of different ideas are buzzing around in your mind, so you want to get them down on paper, or even better, in a Notion database. I am obsessed with Notion. I use it for everything. I have a Notion content calendar, which we're going to look at more later, to organize all of my content. If you want to use a similar setup that I do, I actually have a free Notion content calendar template. I'll link it in the description. You can go grab that. So I'm not quite ready to actually plan my ideas yet, so I'm going to switch over to just my list view where I have a whole list of ideas already sitting there for me. This is one of my biggest tips when it comes to coming up with content ideas. It's not only having sessions like this where you do a lot of planning and a lot of brainstorming all in one batch, but it's also keeping a running list of ideas that will inevitably come to you when you just spend your leisure time scrolling, right? We all do it. We're all spending like hours a day scrolling. So I'm sure you're coming across stuff even when you're not thinking about it that might be a good idea for a reel or a piece of content. So I like to keep a running list in my Notion database. I have the Notion app on my phone so I can just like quickly add something to it when I think of it. But right now we are going to spend 10 minutes of intentional time, again, set that timer, of just writing down the ideas that have come to us. Feel free to come up with multiple variations of each idea here. It doesn't have to be perfect yet. We're just making one big list. There's no need to judge your ideas at this stage or try to pick which the best ones are going to be. Just write down a bunch of them and then later we'll choose. So just let that creativity flow, and in 10 minutes, we'll actually start building that content calendar. All right, friends, we're in the home stretch here. We are almost ready to actually get all these ideas on our calendar. And now that it's been 45 minutes or so, it's a good time to go back and check your DMs, check that question box, check your polls, because you've given it like a bit of time so you can start to see responses from people. I will say, just for the sake of like, it takes a while for everyone to see your stories, it's gonna be worth going back in tomorrow, like 24 hours from when you've posted, to look at all the responses you've gathered, and you can always add that to your long idea list and check back in with the ones that came in later for next month's content. Now, when it comes to getting these on a content calendar, I find it's really helpful to start with a structure. You can call this your content calendar structure, you could call this your strategy, but the idea is you want to decide, how many posts you're gonna do in a given period of time. So let's say how many reels per week, how many carousels per week, etc. And then you wanna get that framework on your content calendar. So I wanna be clear, these are just literally blank spaces that say reel, carousel, or whatever in each week. And then you're gonna start filling it in with ideas. Okay, so how do you come up with a structure that's right for you? This is really gonna look different for everyone. I feel like there's a lot of people giving advice that like everyone needs to post 2 reels per day or like something crazy. And the truth is, the correct strategy for you is one that your audience is going to appreciate, that you actually like doing, and that you actually have time for. Because you're just gonna set yourself up for failure if you feel like you need to make 2 reels a day and like you already have a 9-to-5 job and this is just your side hustle. Like you're never gonna be able to produce at that volume. So it's much better to choose a strategy, a framework for your content calendar that actually feels realistic to you, because you're much more likely to actually keep it going for how long you're gonna need to in order to see growth. Okay, but for the sake of example, let's say I am going to post 3 reels per week and I want to do 1 of them an original reel and 2 of them trendy reels, which if you don't know what I mean by that, I made a whole video talking about the trendy versus original reel strategy, which you can check out. But basically, original reels are ones that don't need a trending audio. It's more like a YouTube video style and it provides kind of more concrete value. Trendy reels tend to be more inspirational and just kind of vibey with a lot of B-roll and obviously a trending audio. They're quicker to make and they tend to go viral, but it's not gonna like sustain community building, which is why original reels are so important. Okay, so I'm gonna get that framework on my content calendar, 2 trendy reels and 1 original reel per week. Let's say I'm gonna do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, just to space it out. I'm gonna get that blank framework on my content calendar, and from there, I'm gonna take the ideas that I came up with during my brain dump session, and I'm gonna start matching them up with the blank spots on my content calendar. This will help me keep a nice balance of content throughout the month. It'll keep me consistent and it'll make sure that my content is kind of reaching towards these different goals consistently. So reaching towards growth with the trendy reels, but also reaching towards community building and building that trust with my audience with the original content. I really love doing this in my Notion content calendar because I can add that new item to my content calendar and I just use my little reels template button to automatically fill in the different tags so that everything's organized really nicely. All right, and that is an hour, and we have a month of content planned. Woo! This is really the first step towards consistency. And consistency not only in the frequency of posting, but also in the quality of the content that you're making and the goals that your content's working towards. So now that you have your content calendar in place, what you need to figure out is actually creating that content. So what I really recommend is having a monthly or a weekly content creation workflow. So the way that I like to approach it is I'll plan my content a month at a time so that I can kind of see the overall strategy and goals there, especially if I'm working towards a particular promotion or, sale of one of my offers or something. So I have that bigger picture of my monthly content calendar, but then I actually go through the process of creating that content on a weekly basis because it just feels more reasonable for me to look at making 3 reels within a week rather than trying to make like 12 reels for a whole month at once. If you want to see what my weekly content creation workflow looks like, I did a whole vlog taking you through not only my Instagram content creation, but also how I make my YouTube videos, get my podcast out. I really recommend checking that out because I think it'll help you come up with your own workflow, your own structure for planning your week to make sure that you can actually implement this content calendar that we planned together. If you did come up with a content calendar by the end of this video, honestly, I would love to see it. If you want to take a picture of your Notion content calendar, post it on your Instagram story and tag me at Katie Steckly. Or if you don't want to post it, you can just DM me a picture, but I'd love to see your content calendars. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you're having adventures and following your dreams, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!